Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Brennan Center for Justice program. The Brennan Center, as many of you know, is a nonpartisan law and policy institute affiliated with NYU Law School. I am Taryn Merkel, and I am senior counsel at the Brennan Center and your moderator this evening. Prior to joining the Brennan Center, I was a federal prosecutor for close to 17 years, where I worked and supervised many serious violence cases. I also served as chief of the Violent Crime and Gangs section and civil rights. And we're here tonight to discuss a very tough topic, urban violence. Nearly 50 people are murdered every day in the United States. And our focus tonight is not to talk about the specific acts of violence, but how to prevent it, the proven strategies that we can use to stop the bleeding on the streets. Violence prevention is a social justice issue, and it is an essential ingredient to criminal justice reform. It involves collaboration between communities and police, and there are lots of challenges. So we are very fortunate today to have gathered a uniquely qualified group to touch upon these really challenging topics. So immediately to my left is Thomas Abt. He studies, writes, and teaches about the use of evidence-informed approaches to reducing violence. He's also the author of the book that first sparked this conversation, Bleeding Out: The Devastating Consequences of Urban Violence and a Bold New Plan for Peace in the Streets. Currently, Thomas works at the Council for Criminal Justice. Prior to that, he was a senior researcher at the Harvard Kennedy School, and he's also held leadership positions in government, both in the New York Governor's Office under Andrew Cuomo and in the Obama administration's Office of Justice Programs. And almost 20 years ago, Thomas got his start working on violence prevention as an assistant district attorney here in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. To his left is Deputy Police Commissioner Risco Menchen-Lewis of the Suffolk County Police Department. Prior to joining the Suffolk County PD, Ms. Menchen-Lewis was an assistant district attorney in Nassau County for 19 years, and she served as a chief in one of their bureaus, and she founded a very important center in Long Island called the Council of Thought and Action, sometimes called CODA, you might hear that tonight, where people work on changing their mindsets to move away from violence. And she focuses on communities where gang violence, prison sentences, and other serious trauma are present. Next to Risco is her colleague, Carlos Jennings, who was previously involved in the criminal justice system. He now serves as a violence interrupter, and he seeks to eliminate gun violence. Carlos is actually out there in the world trying to bring down the temperature on the streets to prevent violence before it happens. And we have a unique opportunity to hear about how that works. And he also started an organization called Positive Energy, Positive Results, that seeks to engage with community, to reduce violence, and to change people's mindsets, to move them away from the temptations of going in the direction of being justice involved and violence involved. And finally, at the end, we have my former colleague from the Brennan Center, James Johnson, who now serves as corporation counsel for the city of New York, where he supervises approximately 1,000 attorneys. Jim was formerly special counsel to New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy during the Atlantic City transition. And he has also held senior positions in the Clinton administration, where he oversaw multiple law enforcement agencies, including the ATF and the Secret Service. He also has a career as a prosecutor years ago, and the Southern District of New York as an assistant U.S. attorney. So please welcome Thomas, Risco, Carlos, and Jim. So first I want to turn to Thomas, and the statistic I mentioned a moment ago, 50 people, nearly 50 people being murdered in the United States each day. Can you give us a sense of the scope of the problem and why addressing urban violence is so important?
Sure. So, every year in the United States, there's approximately 17,000 homicides, about 50 per day. We have a homicide rate here in the United States that's 5 times higher than our high-income peers. It's driven by a gun violence rate that is 25 times higher than our peers. The cost of homicide, of cost of murder, is extraordinary. Obviously, the costs to the victim, their friends and families are incalculable. But the social and economic costs actually can be measured. And when you add them all up, the costs are staggering. A single homicide, the credible estimates range from a minimum of $10 million to a high range of 19 million, and that's both direct and indirect costs. The law enforcement costs, the medical costs, the lost wages, of both the victim and the perpetrator, and also all the intangible costs, all the costs of fear and avoidance, much of which can be measured in terms of declining property values. So there's this, we have this staggering problem, but as Americans, we don't suffer from this problem equally. Urban violence concentrates among the most disadvantaged and disenfranchised among us. African Americans make up about 13% of the population in the United States, but they make up more than half of all homicide victims. The leading cause of death for young African American men and boys is homicide, and homicide causes more deaths than the 9 other leading causes combined. And so these figures are just staggering. And so I think that it's important when we talk about this to recognize that the conventional wisdom talks about urban violence as sort of the inevitable consequence of structural factors: poverty, inequality, lack of opportunity, structural racism. And there's a lot of validity to that argument. However, that causal pathway runs in both directions. And what I mean by that is urban violence is also perpetuating concentrated poverty and all other forms of social and economic injustice. High rates of urban violence really put a stranglehold on poor communities of color. They make it harder to educate. They make it harder to achieve mental, physical, and health outcomes. They make it harder to have decent housing and all of these other issues. And which is why, ultimately, the argument of the book, which is entitled Bleeding Out, is that we need to treat urban violence as a matter of policy as we do a gunshot wound in the emergency room, meaning we need to put it first. And when I say put it first, I'm not suggesting that urban violence is the only thing we need to address in order to address concentrated urban poverty. I'm not even suggesting that it's the most important thing we need to do. I'm simply suggesting that it's the first thing that we need to do as a matter of sequence.
So I've heard you say that to address the violence, we actually need to address the violence. And so, broadly speaking, what do you see as the path forward? What is your recommendation?
Sure. So my colleague at Harvard, Chris Winship, and I performed something called a systematic meta-review, which was a rigorous attempt with him, myself, and an army of grad students to basically wrap our arms around all of the evidence, the most rigorous evidence concerning urban violence reduction. And we did that by performing a systematic review and capturing all of the other systematic reviews concerning urban violence. And so basically we took studies that synthesized studies and then synthesized those. Ultimately, that ended up in us getting our arms around over 1,400 individual rigorous impact evaluations. And the interesting thing that we learned is that the most successful programs had a few elements in common. And we boiled those down to 3 basic elements: focus, balance, and fairness. Focus was important because the problem that these programs were seeking to address in terms of violence was so concentrated. Urban violence is sticky. And what I mean by that is that it concentrates or clusters among surprisingly small groups of people, places, and behaviors. In any given city, 50, 60, 70% of your shootings and killings are going to be perpetrated by a network of people who represent less than 0.5% of the city's population, a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall population. Similarly, in any city, about 5% of a city's blocks generate about 50 to 60% of all crime in that city. And for violence, it's even more concentrated. And then there are a few key behaviors like illegal possession of weapons that aggravate violence and facilitate it further. And so it's a key thing that the conventional wisdom says, if you want to work on urban violence, look at everything but urban violence. focus on work from the outside in, but the evidence says work from the inside out. Now, as to balance, we had a similar sort of moment when we looked at the evidence. I was surprised that when we looked at the evidence that there wasn't sort of a clear preference in the evidence towards enforcement or towards prevention. And in fact, we found examples of successful strategies all along the sort of that tough to soft spectrum. And so we saw some very aggressive law enforcement programs that were effective in reducing violence, and we saw some very prevention-oriented strategies that were also effective. And ultimately that makes sense because as human beings, we respond to both positive and negative incentives. We respond to both rewards and punishments. And so criminals, and particularly violent criminals, are actually no different than the rest of us in that way. And if you look at any city, this city included, there's really no city that's sustainably reduced urban violence simply by arresting their way out of the problem or by simply programming their way. There has to be this balance of carrot and stick. You need both. It's both and, not either or. And then finally, this principle of fairness. One of the things that we saw in the evidence, and just sort of reading the paper every day, is that we have to acknowledge that we're going through a crisis of confidence in the American criminal justice system right now. And that any work in this area has to be paying a tremendous amount of attention to legitimacy and the perceived legitimacy of this type of work by the people who are most impacted by it. And that's the right thing to do just generally, but there's also an important point in the evidence, which is that people's confidence in the criminal justice system translates to people's willingness to engage in violence. This is a concept known in criminology as legal cynicism. And when people, for whatever reason, because of police brutality, because of aggressive stopping and frisking, or for whatever reason, lose trust in police, they become less likely to report crime. They don't want to serve as witnesses. They don't want to serve as jurors. But perhaps most importantly, they don't use the criminal justice system for one of its oldest and most traditional purposes, which is the nonviolent resolution of disputes. So if someone beats up your cousin, you don't call 911. You call your boys. And then a beating leads to a shooting, and a shooting leads to a killing, and so on and so forth. So this idea of legitimacy is very important. If you want to sustainably reduce violence, whatever you're doing has to be perceived as legitimate by the community you're working with.
Just going back for a moment to the concept of balance, you talked about enforcement and prevention, carrots and sticks. Could you explain a little bit about what you mean by that in terms of what types of enforcement and carrots and sticks are recommended to address these issues?
Sure. So I'll give an example with one of the programs that I talk about in the book called Focused Deterrence, or the Group Violence Reduction Strategy. Focused Deterrence is a program that follows very closely these three principles. First of all, focus is in its very name. It only works with the highest risk individuals, the individuals most likely to shoot or be shot. And it focuses on one behavior and one behavior only. That the partnership that exists is there to stop the shooting. It's not an anti-crime initiative. It's not an anti-poverty initiative. It's only an anti-violence initiative. And then this theme of balance, focused deterrence is a partnership of police, prosecutors, community members, and service providers who together confront these individuals with a message of both accountability but also empathy. They say, in sort of very simple terms, they say, we know you're doing the shooting has to stop. If it stops, we are here to help you. And if it doesn't stop, we're here to stop you. And then, having made these promises, a promise to punish and a promise to help, then you got to follow through. And so the people who are willing to change their lives are offered high-quality services where they can jump the line and access high-quality treatment and support and assistance. And for the people who persist in violence, they're targeted for enforcement action. And so that making and keeping of promises, both on both sides, to reward and to punish, is critical.
So sounds great in theory in terms of developing community, neighborhood relationships with police, improving the dialogue in communities, improving legitimacy and fairness in the criminal justice system, but implementation has to be extremely difficult and carefully done in order to make this work. Is that a fair takeaway?
Absolutely. So just looking at focused deterrence, focused deterrence is not a new strategy. It's been around since the 90s. It's been evaluated numerous times. And in fact, the last systematic review identified 24 tests, rigorous tests where there was a comparison group, et cetera, et cetera. And in the 19 of the 24 tests, it was successful. But it's not a panacea, and it's not always successful. And so if you don't implement effectively, if you don't have the right partners at the table, if you say you're doing this strategy, but you're not actually following the principles of this strategy, then the effectiveness of the strategy or of any strategy is compromised. There's no way around the fact that this work is hard, and it takes a tremendous amount of commitment and integrity to do it right.
So that's the perfect transition to Risco, a woman of amazing integrity and creativity in her approach to her legal career and her career now as Deputy Police Commissioner. If I could turn to you now to ask, over the course of your career, you've worked hard to combine policing and community outreach efforts to change the way that people think on the street. It's a very different approach to policing than some might expect. Can you describe how you did it, what your program entailed, and what kind of results you were able to achieve?
First thing I want to say is it's the Council Thought and Action Code, and it's not a program. We're a movement. If you were at our meetings, you'd know we get quite loud when you say program versus movement. But I want to start way back. I was a prosecutor. I had a trial where African-American male, 30 years old, been in jail most of his life, group homes. He stabbed a 16-year-old. I had 3 other witnesses beside the victim who was stabbed. I had a trial, won the trial. Everybody's patting me on my back. I was very happy. I was 9 months pregnant with my son. But what I noticed is during the course of the trial, these very nice young men that were my witnesses, African-American males, all of them were locked up by the time the trial happened. And I was pregnant with my son, and maybe because I was very emotional, at that moment I decided I was never going to be a prosecutor again. I went home on maternity leave. I wasn't going to come back. But fortunately for me, the DA, Dennis Dillon, at the time, called me and said, would you like to do outreach? And so I came back and didn't know what that meant, outreach to gangs. But in my suit, just like this, I went into the streets, went to the corners, went to their houses, and just decided the best way to stop gangs is to get to know them. Because you can't stop something if you don't know what the hell it is. So I just started going to the doors, and I realized that it works. You know, just getting to know people works. Even gang members. After a while, I was like, where's Waldo? They just saw me around so much, they just got used to having Miss Lewis around, and they talked to me. But so that's the beginning of the story. I just want to bring the beginning of the story. It doesn't have to be some complicated thing. It's just about relationships. I was a prosecutor for 19 years, and then in 2012, I was asked to be Deputy Police Commissioner of Suffolk County PD and make that transition to what we call community-based intervention, which is basically focused deterrence and other methodologies. And so what we said was, one, identify through social network analysis, identifying the social networks that are violent. Police know who they are. We just focus on them to arrest. But we also decided to focus on them for interventions. That was my job, to focus on them for intervention. How do we set that up with community-based intervention? We, in Wyandanch, had the highest violence rate. We started a resource center. They had a resource center. Within that resource center, the Department of Labor, Department of Social Services were 2 bus rides away. We made them have the Department of Social Services and Department of Labor in the building. And then we started doing Council of Thought and Action support group, a weekly support group. We can walk in and sit down. It's Wednesdays, 5 o'clock, 5:30. Any of you want to pop in and sit down, you can. It's open to anybody. But what we started doing after that for the criminal justice side is partnering with community members, pastors, credible people in the community, and we started knocking on the doors of, when we knew there was a shooting might happen, police and community knocking on the door saying, we know who you are, we know what you're doing, we care for you, your social network brings us to your door, you're 900% more likely to be killed in your social network, and we want you to live. And community and police made that message. And 2014, 15 is when we really started heating up. We started doing, those are custom notifications for people who are not on probation and parole, or there's an emergency situation. The inspector at the time would call me at 9 o'clock at night and say, "Hey, deputy, I think something's going down." I said, "I got my suit on, let's go." And we go door to door with community members. The second thing is called a call-in. We bring in 25 guys that we know are shooters and bring them in and have a credible messenger like Carlos or another one of the Dakota guys come in and talk to them. A person who lost their child to gun violence. You'd also bring in the police, a DA, to let them know what their charges would be. Sat in a room just like this, right, you all here. You'd get a letter when you walked in, an envelope, and at the end, you'd open up that envelope, and it would have 8.5 by 11 picture of yourself, along with your time you're going to get on the back. We also had CODA members there to say, "Look, I was where you are, and we have a group if you want to change. The resources are there." So we have the resource center already set up. So this is the thing, you can arrest, but it's much better for them not to do time. So those are the methodologies we used, including I added something else besides custom notifications and call-ins. I added a thing I called, I forget what I call it, basically youth intervention. And that was in the high schools. You'll notice in high schools, they call themselves usually some little nickname, but they're a group, they're violent, they're robbing other kids. They grow up, they don't graduate usually, they drift out into the streets, they get a street name, Davidson Street guys, they go to jail, they become Bloods, Crips, or whatever. And so how do you stop the bleed? Is by getting them in the high school age through that intervention. Same thing, meet with the parents first, meet with the kids, give them internships, find out what they want to do, and connect them to it. So violence intervention starts throughout the spectrum. Also reentry. We had a guy, he did 38 years. He did murder, 38 years. Everyone who works in CODA, who are case manager and outreach workers, I think 2 out of 4, 2 out of the 3 outreach workers have murder or manslaughter on their records. That's the work we do, because who better to stop someone who's shooting than someone who's already shot? So that's really, hopefully gave you the outline of what we do.
So it sounds like very carefully thought out work with a lot of close community collaboration. How were you able to establish those relationships?
Basically, the bottom line is you got to be a door-to-door person, whether you're going door-to-door to a community. And interesting, when we first started doing call-ins in Nassau County, Meg Reese is in the audience. We started doing it, the first call-in was in Nassau County for drugs. I was shocked to say the community was most upset, not in the police, but the resources, the agencies. They had no regard for the agencies. They thought they were no good. They thought they treated them badly. They were disrespectful. So some of that credibility and that fairness and that justice, it's across the board. It's not just with police. It's also the agencies that serve in these communities. And so you really have to do your door-to-door to find out and get the community's opinion, like what is the problem here? How can we come together and then address it, and don't act like it doesn't exist, the problems don't exist.
So you said you implemented the program in Wyandanch in 2013?
2013, 14, really hot and heavy.
So what kind of results were you able to see?
Yeah, so let's say 2014, 15, we had a slight dip up because we had a triple homicide. We believe the triple homicide was probably MS-13. That was the beginning of the MS-13 stuff. 2015, 16, it went down 25%. Shooting incidents went down 25%. Shooting victims down 33%. Homicides, 66%. 2016, 17, shootings went down another 22%. Homicides then went down 100%, down to 1. 2017, 18, went down 71% shootings. Shooting victims went down 70%. Trigger pulls went down 55%. And so those are the numbers. And I'll tell you something, 2019, 18, 19, we had a new inspector come in. And I know this is film, but it is what it is. And we didn't follow the methodologies. And violent crime has gone up dramatically. But, that's the thing. We're so used to, America's about arresting, policing about arresting and putting people in prison. And as long as we do that methodology, you're always going to have more people to arrest. Because those kids, adults you're putting in jail, they have children who are going to follow right behind them at a rate of 70%. And so the methodologies of a comprehensive initiative like CODA, along with customs and call-ins and focus deterrence and social network analysis, all these things come together, you can literally, basically eliminate violent crime. But you're asking yourself, well, why aren't they doing it, right? Because habit. America believes in the penal system, punishment. And as long as we have that idea that we'd rather spend $200,000, $220,000 in New York State to put a kid upstate versus $220,000 in the Winans Youth Center, which wasn't getting $220,000 for the entire town, but you'll send one high school kid up for $220,000. As long as we're willing to do that in America, it's not going to change. And that's all about everybody in this room telling 10 people that there's something better besides just arresting people. Although I tell people all the time, I do believe in arresting. I call it a timeout. Just like you do your teenagers, sometimes people have a timeout. But we're also talking about how long you give a person a timeout. So that's it.
I think that goes to the question of balance and having some sticks available. It can't be that there's no consequences for actions, but at the same time, changing the mindset of policing and changing the penal mindset of our society is, of course, a very significant challenge to tackle. I'd like to hear from Mr. Jennings about the actual action. What do you do to, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about how you ended up at CODA and what you actually do to address the folks who might be shooters, the would-be shooters that Thomas described?
Hello, my name is Carlos. I was shot in my community. I was a victim of a robbery, and I was shot broad daylight in front of an elementary school, in front of little kids with book bags on, broad daylight, shot multiple times, 9mm, shot in the chest, shot in the back of the head. I survived, but when I survived, I didn't understand that I just experienced trauma. I just thought that was how my neighborhood taught me how to grow up. So when I grew up in that environment and that lifestyle, that just led me to pick up a gun and to continue to do what I felt the community justice, and I wound up shooting the person that shot me, and I wound up getting 10 years behind that in jail. After doing 10 years incarcerated, I came out of jail. I wasn't home 7 days, and already my old social network had a gun in my hand to go kill a person that snitched on me. After doing 10 years in jail, here I am again, 7 days, not even a week home from jail. I have a gun to go kill another person. But in my mind, I said, you know what, I haven't even seen my grandmother yet. My grandfather died while I was incarcerated, my family members gone, I haven't even experienced life. All I knew was jail and death. I came out of, my mind was all messed up. I moved to Long Island. My parole officer wasn't really helpful, I could say that. But there was a lady in the parole, like a resource lady. She said, I think you might be a good candidate for Ms. Lewis. So I met Ms. Lewis, and I was like, what the hell? She got a police badge on. Like, what? That's the police. But then I'm like, you know what? I listened to what, it's like she just never gave up. She just said, you know what? Like, she asked me a question. She said, she said, are you gonna kill again? And I told her I can't answer that question because in my mind, I wasn't ready to change. I was still ready to pick up all I knew was street justice. All I knew was like kill a person or you be killed out here. But then like over time, she introduced me to one of her concepts called Crazy House Rules. Crazy House Rules was a concept like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where Jack Nicholson was in the crazy house with the crazy people. And she let me understand by being in that community and that thought process, my mind was in the crazy house. So then if I remove myself out the crazy house, I could see how society really works. I could sit in rooms like this and understand life is like this. Life is not the corner. Life is not a pissy elevator in the projects. Life is not a heroin strung out family or abusive or violence, repetitive. So removing myself from that mindset, I wind up becoming a better person to show myself and my community that anything was possible, that change was possible, so to speak. So on top of that, like CODA, Council of Thought and Action, like I said, it changed the way I thought. If my thoughts change, my actions change. If my thoughts keep thinking violence, 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 I'm gonna be a violent, violent person. If my thoughts change, like there's hope. They call it premeditated hopelessness. I'm already expected not to do nothing. I'm already giving up. My society quit on me. I just quit on myself, you know. So then she became like like a lighthouse, like a beacon of hope. She just, I'm always, I'm here. I'm like, you the police? But now then I seen that, I saw like, yeah, she was the police. But then I started seeing she was a human being. I removed the badge from my mind, and I got to see the human being. Like I tried to get in college. My family tried to get me in college. Like when I was young, I got two sisters, and I'm a product of a single parent household. My mother gave us up when we was young, and my father raised us, right? He worked at the VA Medical Center right up the block, 23rd Street. My mother, since she was poor, I tried to get in college after I got shot. I gave her the financial aid form. She said, send me another one. I gave her another financial aid form. I never heard back from her again. I said, if my mother don't want to see me go to school and do better for myself, who am I to do better for myself? When later on, years later, I met Ms. Lewis, I said, I always wanted to go to college. I just wanted to go to school. I feel like I'd do better in school. By me going to school, she helped me get into school. I'm not to take off topic. As a felon, I had to pull out an application for a school. They have a check box on there marked felony. I had to check the box marked felony on there to see if that school was going to accept me. Then I had to write a letter about my criminal history to get in school. How is the school going to accept me after writing my history in school about my life story with violent crimes to get on campus? It took me years and years and years to write that letter until they removed that box that I actually got in school, and now I'm in my third semester of college. You understand? My uncle James Jennings was a dean at Harvard. You know, so like I come from like master's degrees, all types of families, but here I am because of the neighborhood, my poor thinking, poor judgment. I exercised bad judgment. It led me to do negative stuff. So being now that I learned how to do positive stuff, which I say positive energy, positive results, pepper, right? I say I go back to the community. They know my story. I've been shot multiple times. I still got bullets inside of me. You know, they know my history. They know what I've done. They know what my life changed, and I'm here. I don't want to see another person lose their life. I hated guns and violence so much that I went vegan. I said everything deserves a chance to live. I went so extreme to become vegan after I learned that. You know, I don't even like violence no more. I think chickens, birds, everything, butter, everything deserves life. Cows. I don't even fish. Everything that got a heartbeat, I said, if I could stop anything from dying, I will. I became vegan. And then I just became being a better person. Just said, you know, I've been to Chicago. I've saw Chicago where they have Chicago, Coda in Chicago, where in the neighborhood in Chicago, they have, like you got 7-Elevens and liquor stores. They have obituary places, you know what I mean? Headstone places, like fast food restaurants. That's how bad the neighborhood was, where they feed in the community with the violence. So I went there. I like, listen, I've shot somebody. I've been shot multiple times. This is not the way you want to go. Hurt people. Positive energy, positive results. If you have negative energy, you can have a negative result. Everything deserves a life. The gun your life is more important than the gun. You know, just giving them good information, cognitive behavioral therapy, just reinforcing good information, giving them resources, go back to school, get a job. Like, what do you want to do? What is a corporate plan that they say in Coda? What do you want to do? Try to become the best version of yourself. Who are you? What do you want? What's your talent? What's your special skill? What do you like to do? What do you want to do? And then we just try to take what you want to do and then figure out a way to make that come into life. Put that into fruition just by what you want to do, because maybe you didn't get that chance. Somebody gave up on you, but we're not going to give up on you. That's pretty much it.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. And your openness to sharing your own transformation, I think, is very inspiring. And when you work with folks who, you know, are still in the life, potentially prone to violence, How do you go about those conversations?
Oh, man. Well, actually, there's nothing that I have not done that they could actually say. You understand? Like, what have you done? Like, what I've done, I've sold drugs, I've done this, I've done that. Like, I've done everything that you've done wrong more than you. So I know the things that you're doing. I know what path that leads to. Don't crash and burn. Like, I'm an auto mechanic right here. We're gonna fix the car is you. You know, don't crash and burn. Don't hit that wall, because if you hit that wall too hard, there's a chance that you might not come back to life. You understand? And that's the last thing we want. So we just try to keep giving hope and don't give up. If you fall, we still here. If you fall, we still here. If you fall, we still here. But you know what? Don't give up on yourself. We just keep trying. Just keep going. Don't give up.
Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, in our sort of opening round of questions, I'd like to turn to Jim Johnson. And I know from working with Jim at the Brennan Center that he likes to think hard about the systems and structures that sort of make our society tick. And so, Jim, coming from your perspective, somebody who's worked in different levels of government and is executive branch experience, I know you've been thinking a lot about the off-ramps to criminal justice system involvement. How do we get people away from getting criminal justice involved? And how do we change our societal strategy to reconceptualize policing in the way that is necessary to make these not programs, but systems sustainable?
Well, thanks, and thanks for holding this a really important opportunity for us to exchange views. And I, you know, unlike most book authors, you didn't hold up your book when you were talking about your book. You did not say to anybody, you know, in my book, I say X, Y, and Z. I hardly heard that at all. You should buy his book. It's a really terrific compendium of strategies. But we wouldn't be a panel if we didn't have at least some points of creative tension. And there is, you know, here, I think, you know, a little bit of point of tension, because I will focus on, I've been in and out of these, working on these issues from a variety of perspectives for now probably 3 decades. And what I want to do is focus a little bit on Atlantic City and talk about the issues there. So first, scene setter. Atlantic City is known, but to some, as one of the East Coast playgrounds, particularly because when casinos, if you wanted to go to a casino anywhere on the East Coast, there was only one place to go, Atlantic City. But it also is a city that has gone through repeatedly big booms and terrible busts. When Governor Murphy took over and was sworn in as governor, he asked me to work as his special counsel on the Atlantic City turnaround. It was supposed to be a 45-day assignment. It turned into a 2-year assignment. And I want to describe to you a little bit about what I found when I got there. You've heard it in a variety of ways from all of the participants on the panel. Essentially, James Baldwin said this: you cannot fix every problem, but you can't fix a problem that you don't face. And so my first task was actually to go to Atlantic City and understand. I strongly believe you don't get smarter by talking, and so I listened. And the typical thing to go when you go into a community like this is you talk to the city fathers and mothers, the leaders of the leading corporations, the heads of the Chamber of Commerce, the leading leaders of the different houses of faith. And when I went in, I talked to them for sure. But we also talked to the parents of kids in the Head Start program. And we talked to the casino workers to ask them about their lives. And we didn't get as much of a complete picture, but we had to understand the systems that were driving a lot of things that were going on in Atlantic City. So and part of it was also the violence within the Atlantic City. But it was my perspective that while we definitely had to deal with issues of policing and trust, we also had to deal with the systemic issues that were driving some of those problems. Everything from how the relationship between police and community was structured. It wasn't just a question of whether or not the officers were considered fair. It was also a question of who had the power in that relationship. And so we, and I'll talk a little bit about this, we changed some of the structures governing who was making strategic decisions around criminal law enforcement. Our view was if you truly work to change structures to empower people, you will be much more likely to build trust very fast, to get their views on solutions pretty quickly, and get to a point where they would be willing to take a chance and do the risky things, the sort of things that the movement, the CODA movement, is doing, and the sort of risky personal things that Mr. Jennings told you about, where he put himself out there. And this is a pretty safe place to put himself out there. The place is what he's talking about, putting himself out there. That's not safe. It's not emotionally safe, and it's definitely not physically safe. And he did it, and he's doing it. So we had to do things that were going to build trust quickly. One of the things that every single day, and I actually put it on the wall in the office, when change is imposed on people, they experience it as violence. When they participate in that change, they experience it as justice. I think that's worth saying again. When change is imposed on people, they experience that change as violence. When they are part of it, and when they participate in the change, they experience it as justice. And that was one of the operating principles of the work of the team we pulled together as we're trying first to understand and then implement some policies, many of which are reflected in Thomas's book, which is excellent, and I commend everyone. But we wanted to do something more than strike at problems. So I'll tell you a quick set of problems that we had during this 2-year period that I was working there. We started to understand the problem. We started to work with the communities to generate solutions. We focused on law enforcement and on violence. And we were getting some traction in the last year, starting in early 2019. And then summer came around, and school got out. And then one kid, Atlantic City's small, 40,000, less than 40,000 people. One child was killed. The next week, another child was killed. Third week, an 18-year-old mother was killed holding her 1-month-old baby because her brother was believed to have snitched in a case. The next week, a 4th child was killed. Really small community where everyone knows, if you don't know the person, you know their cousin or their uncle, or your dad played basketball with their dad in high school. So this was a community that was going through huge trauma. And one of the things we did was we convened the major stakeholders, and we pulled together a program really on the fly in which we were able to identify who the shooters were, who was likely to either shoot or be shot. And we sent them to camp. They were kids. They were 14 and 15-year-old children that were killing other children. And the ones at risk of being killed were children as well. And one of the casino owners was running a camp, he had access to a farm, and one of the ministers had a full-on farm. And so we took 30 of the kids most likely to shoot or be shot, and we sent them to a farm. And then we learned that for this to be sustainable, it confirmed that we had to address other things. Some of the kids who went to this farm, they weren't eating. And so, we can't not address the fact that they weren't eating. Atlantic City is this casino town. And what we found as we started to dig deeper in sort of the system that was surrounding these kids was this. In most communities, 1 in 10 families has an adult who leaves home for work after noon. In Atlantic City, it was 3 in 10 families had an adult, sometimes the only adult, leaving home for work after noon, which meant that many of these kids were both hungry and unsupervised. And so our strategies were built around dealing with some of those systemic issues. One of the children was killed in abandoned homes, and there were a ton of them. And we kept seeing, okay, what's the system that's driving this? How do we intervene with the kids? But also simultaneously, how do we deal with the systems that are continuing to generate these issues?
So the abandoned homes you described sounds like hotspots. Thomas, do you have any other additional thoughts on the implementation? We've been hearing about changing mindsets, changing community police relations, community oversight boards, community involvement, addressing the actual perpetuators of violence. We have to turn to, I want to get some questions in, so we have not a ton of time remaining, but any more thoughts on implementation and application before we turn to questions?
Well, I think that it's one thing to read a book, and in the book there's, I would say, between 10 to 12 strategies that have a large body of evidence that if you pick one or more of these strategies, you may have some sustainable success. It's one thing to pick that off of a list. It's another thing to really understand that deeply. It's another thing to then organize politically around that and create a sustainable strategy. And in my experience, one of the sort of key challenges is often in response to a crisis, either a number of children being shot or skyrocketing homicide rates over a particular year. A community and the political leadership, more particularly in the community, will find the will to sort of say, okay, we're going to sort of put the normal ideology aside, all of the posing, and we're actually going to focus on what works. Often, then those strategies are adopted, they're implemented, people commit to them. And what happens? The violence goes down. But when the violence goes down, so does the urgency. The urgency leaves. And so then people often sort of drift back to their normal ideological saints. And the thing that is difficult politically about this work is that it doesn't really fit people's talking points in terms of it's not a hard left strategy, it's not a hard right strategy. People from both sides of the political spectrum are going to find things that they agree with initially and disagree with initially. And so this work that has had so much success on the ground has struggled over years to get political traction. And really, honestly, that's the main reason I wrote the book the way I did. The book is for a mainstream audience. And the idea was, I've been doing this for now 20 years. And unlike some people, who have written books about these things, I already had access. I had pushed these policies at the White House. I'd pushed these policies at the State House. I'd had access to dozens of mayors. So it's not that I wasn't in the room. But even with all that access, I have had an uneven track record in getting these strategies implemented. And the reason is because, maybe my imperfections as an advocate notwithstanding, the reason is there's not that constituency. There's not that obvious constituency where a mayor can say, oh yeah, my people will understand this and will immediately do this. And so the book is intended to sort of talk to you, the new constituency, and to build that constituency, and for people to say, hey, if you really care about this problem, why aren't we willing to look at it in a slightly unconventional way and have some unconventional success?
Ms. Briscoe, you look like you want to respond.
I'm going to go a little further on that. It's simple. We don't want to look at it because we are now a colorblind society. It's racism. Because black bodies don't matter. Now, if that stuff starts getting in the news and other property values start going down, wait a minute now, we need some new strategies. But once those strategies work, We're going to go back to doing what we did because we really don't care about those bodies. We really don't care if those guys go to jail. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's kind of good because they give jobs upstate. And those are the facts. And we may not like those facts, but those are the facts, right? And so, and the reason why I know this because I did the work. You wanted the numbers, we got the numbers. So why aren't we doing this nationally? Because we don't give a damn. We don't care if they die. But let me tell you something. From CODA, we got electricians, we got plumbers, you got guys on Long Island Railroad, you got guys, we have a guy who's working at TSA. They're not just, menial jobs. They're electricians, they're plumbers. There's a thing on Suffolk County called Black Long Island, 24,000 black people on Long Island, and they're hiring CODA guys because they have their own businesses. We're not talking about people who need to go on welfare after it's over. We're talking about wonderful minds that we are losing. But we don't give a damn about those minds. And how do I know? Because we got the numbers. We did the work. You've done the stats. The numbers are there. The work's been done. It works. But why are we doing it? Shame on us.
Jim?
Can I say amen to that? Is that okay? One of the problems that we have as we're trying to move through there, I've talked a little bit about some structural issues, and I'm only going to talk briefly, but a big structural challenge for progress in this area is the narrative that we have about what we have been doing and what this nation has done. Too often, we are very, very, say, euphemistic about the consequences of what this nation's history is. And I think the Deputy Commissioner talked about our habits. If you looked at the face of a clock and you took it from 1629, and when the first Africans arrived here, and you painted that as like the time from midnight to, say, noon, and you looked at the number of generations in which the mental habits and the process habits of this country were not about segregation, but about slavery, that would take you from midnight to about 8 in the morning. And then you go through the period of segregation, basically a period when we had our own, Jim Crow that is, when we had our own judicially sanctioned, legislated period of apartheid. That gets you until about 10 o'clock. And then when you get to the time period after, say, the Voting Rights Act was passed, and we're still fighting those battles, you still don't get until about maybe 11:15 when President Obama was elected. We have really hard habits around these issues of justice in this country. And I think what's really important, and we may not agree on everything, but your willingness to speak plainly to these issues is something that we don't do. And that means progressives as well. And also the work around fixing injustices, even in progressive organizations, and addressing that plainly is something that we don't do. And so until we're able to change a lot of those narratives, this work is we'll make progress, and people still won't see it. There'll be other explanations for it. And we'll go back to the old narrative, even though the data show that across the country, we've been able to do much better on criminal justice reform, even in red states, without actually driving the arrest numbers up, but using common sense, using empathy, dealing with the facts of humanity, and even dealing with structural issues, either within the criminal justice system narrowly defined or within social systems much more broadly defined. So we do need to speak plainly and tell a different narrative.
So I do want to take some questions, but I know Risco has another comment. And then if you have a question, there is a microphone, and I invite you to step up to it. We'll turn to questions after Risco's comment.
Just a quick one. The clock analogy is very good. I like to throw this analogy out. I am the first generation out of American apartheid. I was born in apartheid. So that's how long it's been. I'm the first generation out of American apartheid, right? And so that's how long we've had these systems. And the other system we need to get away from is this concept of the white hero in the story. Because of that, sometimes the person needs to be the hero on the ground so the work doesn't get done like it should, because the hero can't get out the way, and let the guys who can do the work be the heroes in their own damn stories. So I'm going aggressive today, aren't I, people?
So much to think about. I know there are questions. So if you could, I just want to ask if you could keep your questions actual questions. If you could identify yourself and ask an actual question, that would be great. I know there are many people with questions, so we'd like to keep the questions moving as quickly as we can. Sir?
Well, hello, I'm Clinton Smith. I really agree that I know that you've been in jail for like 7 I know you've been in jail for like 7 days, 7 days. The question for shooting, but the question is, how long you been in jail?
Oh man, I did 10 years in jail from 2004 to 2014.
Wow.
So the whole world changed in 10 years. Somebody that was 8 years old is 18 now. You understand? So luckily, I'm on my 3rd semester of college. That's the new story. You know, positive energy, positive results. That's really it, man. 10 years in jail was very, very uncomfortable.
Well, I never been to jail.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a fact. Good luck to you.
Good luck.
Hi, my name is Hussein Mahmoud. I'm a realtor in Southeast Queens. I'm here because this is a topic that I lived back in the 90s and early 2000s. It's a topic. City that I was a public official in was the murder capital of the United States for about 10 years. So the question that I'm bringing about is that we're talking about reforming a system that is illegal in itself. When I say it's illegal in itself, I found out statistically that 60% of the guns in our neighborhood are illegal guns. They're not being bought legally. There's nothing being done about that. Nobody's doing a study to stop it. You know, at one particular time, my city sued the gun companies, and our state legislators actually helped to throw the lawsuit out. So the question that I have, speak about the illegal guns that are doing the killings, because that's the illegal part of this whole system that we're looking at.
So Thomas has a section in the book about this.
Sure. So, you can't talk about urban violence without talking about guns. But it's also important not to frame this issue as about something else. And generally, real talk, we're at the Brennan Center. Progressives generally have 3 responses to issues of urban violence. They either say it's all about the guns, they either say, or it's all about poverty and root causes, or they say it's all about the racism and brutality of the criminal justice system. There are elements of truth to all of those things, but it's not what the evidence says actually is most effective in saving Black and brown lives in these communities. And that is those 3 principles of focus, balance, and fairness. So to the gun issue, we don't have a gun violence problem in the United States. We actually have 4 gun violence problems. We have a suicide problem, which is 2/3 of all gun deaths. We have an urban violence problem, which causes the clear majority of the homicides. We have a domestic violence problem, and we have a mass shooting problem. We devote a tremendous amount of time and attention to the mass shootings, which caused the least amount of deaths, and surprisingly less to everything else. And interestingly, with urban violence, there is a disconnect between that form of violence and all the others, in that the guns that are used in urban violence are already illegal for a variety of reasons. Felon in possession, the person is too young to have it, whatever. And so the solutions for these other issues, mass shootings, suicides, and others, don't really impact urban violence because the guns are already illegal. And so what I want to just suggest is that when we are talking about urban violence, we can't change the subject to something else. If we're going to address urban violence, we need strategies specifically targeted to urban violence. I've been all around the country, and when you have these conversations, people will stand up and they'll say, well, this is all well and good. I understand what you're saying about the evidence, but, this is all about jobs. Or someone else will say, this is all about educating the kids. And, someone will say, oh, this is all about, addressing structural racism. And they're right to a certain extent, but that is a way to reframe the question as something else. And all I'm saying is, as progressives, we need to be able to do more than one thing at a time. And our broader, multi-generational efforts to solve these other problems, we should be able to, at the same time, do something about Black and brown people dying on the streets right now.
Ma'am?
Okay, so my name is Babe Howell. I'm a professor at CUNY School of Law, and I have been doing research on gang policing and gang prosecution here in New York City. And we do have credible messengers and violence interrupters who are doing some of the work we've heard about here very effectively. I have huge concerns about the gang takedowns and gang prosecutions and wonder why prosecutors and police, who are incredibly expensive and trained in different areas, are so key in this balanced system that you propose. What I see here in New York is no balance. Gang prosecutions, they prosecute gang kids and kids that they say are in crews. They prosecute whole networks on theories of vicarious liability, conspiracy, and RICO, throwing the book at many people. In the Bronx 120, there were dozens and dozens about, there were 3 dozens who were marijuana sellers. 60 of them were not gang-related. So I see something very dangerous in centering prosecutors and police, and unnecessary. The things that seem to be working, that Risco was talking about, that the others were talking about, why do we need police? And I know you're doing a meta-analysis, so you're not finding probably many rigorous studies that don't center police, but when you say there's nothing that no one has ever programmed their way out of it, why not? Aren't social workers, aren't summer camps, aren't the resources that they're doing door to door, why do they need to be police? Why do they need to be prosecutors?
Sure. Well, let me just clarify.
That's a fact.
A key component of the balanced approach is not centering police and prosecutors. It's having police and prosecutors as a part of an overall solution, and there has to be a balance. I think that what we have to be careful about is suggesting that the answer is all police or all law enforcement or not involving law enforcement at all. And in fact, there is this story about New York City, which and the New York City miracle in terms of this huge reduction of crime and violence. And that story is conventionally told all about policing, good or bad, whether you are for or against, sort of policing in New York City, which is obviously a huge oversimplification to begin with. But in fact, there's a whole nother story in New York City, which is that there is an extraordinarily rich tapestry of alternatives to incarceration and non-incarceratory alternatives and social programs. I have to say, you may not see that if you just are in New York City, but if you go to Baltimore, if you go to Detroit, or if you go to other places, no other place has that. And some of the research that we see shows that, Pat Sharkey's work, who's formerly at NYU, right here, shows that those programs have a big anti-crime effect, both in this city and nationally. So let me clarify, I agree with you. You can't center police and prosecutors, but you also can't let your skepticism, even though it may be well justified, lead you to a policy solution that ignores police and prosecutors entirely.
And Risco, I heard you.
I just wanted to say something else. This is the thing. If you've been on these streets, some people need a timeout. They cannot function out here. Their minds are so screwed up that they will kill people and kill more people and kill some more people after that. You need to get them off the streets, right, and give them a sit down. Now, I've even gone to the jail and say, you sitting down right now, have you got your senses together? Because we're going to keep locking you up unless you change. And so I've been hearing this. I was in Chicago. They were talking about getting rid of all police. That's like saying, you know what, children don't need parents. You know, no, you need parenting. People need parenting. You need rules. You need people going to enforce the rules for those who can't. But you need comprehensive and a balanced system that covers the gamut of opportunities. But the most important thing on the stage you heard, the most important thing is focused deterrence. You need to identify who and get with them. Because if these 5 over here are the problem, and you provide programs for everybody else, and those 5 don't ever get in the program, those 5 are going to kill some of these. Actually, they probably won't. They'll kill each other, because social networks stay within each other. So you need police. And I'm not just saying, I'm saying that because I'm on the corners. Guys need time out sometimes. And then you can talk to them and get them back out. But you need police. You need resources. You need a balance of the system. And yes, some places they don't have it, but we know historically 450 years tell you why.
So Carlos, having transformed from somebody who's very skeptical when they saw the badge on Risco's uniform to somebody who wanted to answer that question, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, rest in peace to my cousin Eric Garner, who was killed for selling cigarettes. You understand? So, like, I really had a disgusting view of law enforcement at one time. You understand? Hurt, cried, trauma. But at the end of the day, I understand, you know, that people like myself who has committed, you know, heinous acts, who has done gun purchases, traveling from Virginia, from Louisiana, from Kentucky, with guns to put in our community to keep making violence happen, I was the problem, you understand? I was the problem. So I understand when they group people together, I understand that RICO Act, and they just grouping everybody together, whether the Bronx and all that, that could be prosecutorial misconduct or whatever, but some people do belong in jail. Like, if I didn't go to jail, I was going to commit another murder, or going to commit more murders, or commit multiple murders. And if I didn't get a time out, I won't know if I would have been alive or dead today. You know, and that's just speaking from myself personally.
Thank you.
Hope that answers the question somewhat. A positive energy, positive results. I love you, all right? I love you. Positive energy. That's all. That's it.
Sir?
Yeah, my name is Dave Elke. I'm a volunteer, and I've been working with the Closed Rikers Build Communities campaign for the past 3.5 years. I think a good example of ingrained habits difficult to change is the bail reform bill, which was passed last April, but was just implemented January 1st. After 2 weeks of being in operation, the fearmongers, including our new police commissioner and prosecutors, want to put people in jail after they arrest them, and they want to go back. They want to turn the law back. They don't want to let people out on supervised release or diversion kind of programs. They want to put them in jail and go back to the old methods. So my question is, how do we change that narrative in the law enforcement area? I agree with the point that some people need a timeout for a particular situation, but there's a lot of people that are just too poor in the past to post bail, and they got put aside. That was the way that we put people in jail and got them off the streets. But how do we change the narrative in the community to let this bill play out and take advantage of the progress we've made?
So I know that this is an issue that Jim has been working on here in the city. Do you have any thoughts on how to change the narrative around bail?
Well, part of it is actually, anytime there's any significant change, legislatively or otherwise, there's going to be a shakeout period, an understanding period, and there's an evaluation period. And I think right now, we're in the middle of an evaluation period, and there are lots of conversations about the law itself. As to the narrative, I think that, I have been in this post for maybe 10 weeks. But I've been in or around law enforcement for off and on. I guess I was an assistant U.S. attorney in 1990, so that's 30 years ago. And I have seen and been part of the narrative changing dramatically. And there's still more work to be done around that. And I think that people are actively involved in that.
So I think we have time for one more question, sir.
In terms of interventions other than law enforcement, I've heard there's been some surprising positive results from just going into communities and cleaning up abandoned lots and making, relatively low-cost interventions that perhaps give people hope, but it's really been shown to reduce violence, as I understand it.
Yeah, I think that hotspots is something that Thomas talks about in his book, and I'd also love to give Jim a chance to take this one after Thomas's thoughts.
Sure. So, we call this colloquially cleaning and greening, addressing vacant lots, abandoned buildings. And I would say the evidence right now is promising, not proven. There's been some good work done in Philadelphia, some good studies. The body of evidence is not large enough yet that we're that we can be fully confident. But as you said, it's not very expensive. And so my view is, if it's not very expensive, and there's some evidence in favor of it, let's move forward. It's especially important that when we're talking about these violent hotspots, that for a variety of reasons, that we are not simply targeting these locations for policing. We also have to target them for investment. And so it's important in these most violent locations that it's not just enforcement, as our previous questioner asked, but that we're also identifying some investment. So I think it's worth doing. I have to caution, we have been doing crime prevention through environmental design, it's called CPTED, in the field for 30 years, hundreds of millions of dollars gone to it. The evidence is very uneven. So the idea that we can design our way out of crime with no other solutions is probably not there. But it's an exciting complement to a lot of these other strategies.
Jim?
One of the challenges in almost any policy area, particularly in the criminal justice area, is that people will latch on to a particular strategy, usually one element, and that's the silver bullet. And in Atlantic City, we said, we have to do many things well. We just can't do them all at the same time. But there has been work that has been done, a book that I would commend to folks thinking about community change beyond violence, is called The Neighborhood Project. It's a book by David Sloan Wilson, who is an evolutionary biologist at SUNY in Binghamton. And he decided, something, I'm here in the ivory tower, I need to get out on the street. I need to get proximate to the issues and understand the street and his community from a systemic perspective. And one of the things that he noticed was people react to their environments. It's not a silver bullet. But people react to their environments in ways that either encourage social behavior or pro-social behavior or anti-social behavior. So if you want to increase the likelihood of success in a community, some of the things to pay attention to is just the look of the community. When a community looks run down, people within that community can feel run down. When people feel undervalued, disvalued, cheapened, or cast away, they lack hope, which is like the cornerstone of your question, well, what gives people hope? A lot of these things point towards a bigger issue, is how can people believe in their community, believe in their life chances, have a young man that understands, well, wait a second, life doesn't have to be like, you went through a list of things, that whether or not it's being in a projects with the smell of urine in the hallway, or seeing a junkie strung out, or any of the other things that you listed through. And life could be like this. And too often, I'm one of 55 in my family, 55 cousins in my generation. I'm one, and there's one lawyer in that group. I had very, very, very different life chances from my cousins. And so, getting back to sort of the structural issues from many of my cousins, not all, but getting back to sort of the structural issues, people need to understand that they have opportunity. But you can't understand it unless people actually decide that they're going to make it. And with that hope and with that work, and with, yes, targeted deterrence, we can get our arms around this, but do much, much more. It's great to keep you safe, it's important, but to get you in college, that's our goal.
And I see Risco, you wanted to add on.
The SEPTED idea, recently, one of the CODA does community service projects. So, and because I'm Deputy Police Commissioner, we do them with police. So police and CODA members, those previously incarcerated, and police doing community service projects together. So in terms of a community event, we did a Habitat for Humanity house, renovated the house, so we're building houses together. And so you have people who've, like Carl said, done heinous crimes who are changing their communities, but also building houses in the neighborhood. And working together. So those are some of the things that you can do when you have a CODA and police working together to transform a community.
And I'd also just like to observe and recognize a couple of neighborhood community officers from the NYPD are here tonight, and they are involved in the type of urban identification that you identified in terms of identifying problem spots in their neighborhoods and seeking to clean them up, changing the lighting, making sure the streetlights aren't burnt out, things that actually can change the conditions of the neighborhood that can sometimes have positive results. But we are running short on time, so I wanted to just close with one final question, and I don't know how many of you would like to answer it, but I know many in the audience are wondering what they can do. And Thomas, you touched on this before. What can a community member or a concerned citizen do to help stop the bleeding in the streets?
So I think that the main thing I would say is, go towards the problem. And what I mean by that is, if you are not from one of these communities, go to one of these communities. Go to an organization in one of these communities. I have to say, white progressives like myself, we're very good at inviting unconventional people to our meetings, our neighborhoods, and those things. And we're very comfortable with that. But how many of us are actually willing to go to that community, spend real time, and work in those communities? Far fewer. And so what I would say is go to these communities, create real relationships, and use the political capital that, unfortunately, a reality, that you may have in favor of those people. Don't take over. There's nothing worse than someone coming in and then grabbing all the oxygen. But be part of the solution. And one of the things I have found is that this work is really, really tough. And I'll be honest, sometimes it'll break your heart. But it is incredibly gratifying over the long run. And so I urge all of you to move towards this problem, create authentic relationships with people who are dealing with the problem, and really, get your hands dirty.
Any other calls to action?
One thing is read the book. Seriously, because it gives you a comprehensive knowledge about the methodologies. And once you know the methodologies, you can then speak to other voters to get those methodologies implemented in your communities. And the other thing is, if you want to come to a community meeting, I brought some brochures of CODA, and they're on the table over there. Grab a brochure, and if you want to come to a meeting, just come to a CODA meeting. Sit in a circle with the rest of the people in the CODA circle. As I think you'd learn a lot, and I think you'd enjoy it. And you might get some other ideas about what you'd like to do next. So that's it.
I think the best thing that ever happened to me after being introduced to Ms. Lewis, I've been to the Smithsonian Museum of African American History twice. And I got to learn the true history of America and my history as an African American person, where I was never taught my history. I was only taught what America told me. We had Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, and then maybe, I don't even know, maybe Oprah Winfrey. You know what I'm saying? So I had to learn the true history of America. You understand? And one of the kids that we took to the African American History Museum, he stood up on a block and he realized they sold us on a block and we actually sell on a block and they lock us up on that same block, but not that language. So just being experienced in that in itself of the history of America, it got me to see that I can change and we can change as a people. So that was helpful for me, learning, education.
Jim, any final thoughts?
Get uncomfortable. Get uncomfortable. This is good space. This is safe space. But get close, both to our history and understand it. There are glorious things in our history. There are ugly and awful things in our history. And understand that we need to be honest about all of that. So that's thing one. And related to thing one is get uncomfortable with how even interrogate how you think. A couple of times we've talked about communities as if there's like one community and then there's another community. Until we get to the point where I understand that the community in South Bronx is my community, even though I don't live in the South Bronx, that Bed-Stuy is my community, even though I don't live in Bed-Stuy, that this is our community. We are accountable for all of it. It's good to get close. It's good to say we're going to get proximate and go someplace, but we don't need tourists for change. We need people to embrace all of it and understand that we are accountable for all of it. And that's how we'll make a difference.
So lots to think about, lots of additional discussion that you can take back to your communities and your places of work. But please join me in thanking our panel, Risco, Carlos, and Jim Johnson, and of course to our author, Thomas Abt, the author of Bleeding Out. And I'm Taryn Merkel. Please keep up with the Brennan Center's work by signing up for our newsletter or following us on social media. You can learn more about our work at brennancenter.org. And I want to thank you all for coming and have a great night.